Hello and welcome to Computer Lab Hijinks, a show about games, old software, and web ephemera. And we are today talking about the Dark Souls series, and specifically DSFix, a mod that repairs some functionality in the PC port. I am Nathan.
And I am William.
There we go. And we're going to front load this with a little bit of credibility. We're going to talk about our love of the Souls games, which we don't normally like to do, but I feel like that'll excuse whatever weird stuff we say later. So we need to put our credibility right at the front.
Fair.
What have you brought with us today?
Okay, so Dark Souls 2.
2 copies.
Double the 2 math.
And there's a backstory as to why you have 2 copies,
Yes.
which doesn't fully explain it, but we'll save that.
It's profoundly stupid.
We'll save that for the end of the episode, but it is a good story.
Okay.
And I see your 2 copies of Dark Souls 2, and I will raise you my collection, remake of Demon Souls, which I've played and enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
I have original Demon Souls, which I played and enjoyed before Dark Souls came out, so just before people come at me. I'm credible. I bought this at Target. Fell in love with the original Demon Souls. I have a Steelbook copy of Dark Souls 2 that doesn't include any of the bonus stuff. This is just the copy they had at GameStop. So I got that. And then, of course, I got The Best of Will Ferrell, Volume 2, UMD video. So it's actually the second best of Will Ferrell. I feel like I need to brag about this whenever I can find it. So those are my games that I'm proud of. And we're here to talk about DSFix. So kind of the thesis right up front I want to say about DSFix is that the PC port of Dark Souls is one of the all-time games, certainly one of the great games of all time, and a pretty horrible port. And so those are the 2 things that are a perfect mixture for a mod like this to just really take off. DSFix. The text for this video, we're looking at a ROMChip article, DSFixing Dark Souls, which is an interview with the modder Durante by Logan Brown, Marina Fontalan, and Alexander John Daniel Morawski. And I guess right off the top, we should say that obviously Dark Souls is the follow-up to Demon Souls, which was a significantly less popular game. And I would argue a lot of that's due to its multi-platform approach. Would you agree? Question mark?
Yeah, I think the popularity exploded when it became multi-platform and picking off the tailwinds of this kind of obscure title within the PlayStation 3's library at the time. Like, Demon Souls only sold like a few million copies to this day, with the remake included, I believe.
Wow. It's like a fan favorite, but not everyone played it. Certainly. Or didn't break into the main zeitgeist in the way that Dark Souls did.
Yeah, when it went multi-platform and you got that Bandai Namco publishing rather than the kind of fiasco it had with Sony's kind of Western divisions were wary that like, oh, this game's not going to sell because gamers like easy games these days. And it was kind of a weird time for that. And only for, ironically, Dark Souls to be so instrumental in, igniting this idea about game difficulty and everything. Yeah, Demon Souls was the bit of a calm before the Storm King.
There we go.
As it were. So yeah, once it went multi-plat, it became like the big hard game, and all that reputation with it.
And sort of just to preface, both of us, we don't really talk about Dark Souls in terms of its difficulty.
Absolutely.
It is certainly a hard game. It is legitimately a difficult game, but I think the sort of really fratty bro culture that came out of it of like, it's the hardest game ever. Yeah. And for me, as someone who happens to like a lot of the games that have that label, like I love Super Meat Boy. And then for me, Demon Souls was like an interesting follow-up to that. I don't celebrate that part of it. I think it's interesting, certainly, and it's a huge part of how the game was designed. But yeah, the sort of like, if you beat this, you're a pro gamer. To me, that's just stupid, I guess.
Fair.
But that is what led to its success, because that's also, you're looking at Dark Souls coming out, not just multi-platform, but the early days of Twitch streaming. And this is a game that you could play and like throw the controller on stream, right? I think that's certainly the way that I know it was talked about. And the people that we went to high school with who suddenly were talking about Souls games, it was always in that context of like, oh, did you see this streamer? He got so mad at the rats on the ledge in Dark Souls. I'm like, is that the best part of the game? You're not talking about like the narrative or the art direction? Whatever. Doesn't matter. I'm a hater. But yeah, it really broke through. And so the thing with Dark Souls especially is that it's a beautiful looking game. Art direction, the framing of shots, right? Everything's built with this third person camera in view. I think of maybe even going back to Demon Souls, like the start of Shrine of Storms, where there's like that guy in the distance. I'm explaining it so badly, but we'll put up the clip. Like the way they framed that initial shot is so good. Gorgeous looking game. Yeah. And there's a division to be made between creative choices, art direction, and the sort of pixel peeping, polygon counting tech aspect of it.
Yeah.
And I think we can both say, as people who love FromSoft, they are not a tech focused company. the games never performed at the bleeding edge. They weren't like Killzone 2, right? And that was never the point of these games. And that really comes to a head with the PC port. And so the game launches on PC, and there's sort of, even before launch, there's rumblings that this port is going to be terrible. It's sort of the way it's being talked about.
Okay.
And we'll get into a bit later. There's a quote by Durante himself, but it's basically, the question is, was the port bad, or was the port just a pretty literal port of the Xbox game, but without any of the enhancements or changes that PC gamers expect?
Right.
So is this almost a McLuhan-esque, here's what PC gamers want on their platform, and this port isn't providing it? Because truthfully, nothing was broken from the transition. Right? Like Xbox 360 to PC, it's the same game, runs at the same resolution and frame rate, performance is basically the same, but it's lacking very basic things that, as we'll get into, are quite easy to do. Like custom resolutions and things like that, or custom internal resolutions. You've got a lot of notes on reviews of the time. I'm going to open up with one that's, from what I saw, was one of the more famous comments before the game came out.
Okay.
So The Devil's Bargain by Eurogamer, which is an incredible title. There's also something curious about the resolution too, in that there's no change in clarity when attempting to crank up the settings. On close inspection, it appears that Dark Souls PC uses the same 1024 by 720 internal frame buffer as the console versions, regardless of which resolution has been set in the menus. The option provided is for output resolution only, a simple courtesy to allow the game to play on most monitors, but the image quality will always remain the same. In short, PC gamers will very much be getting the genuine console experience here, right down to the pixel. So the quote explains it pretty well, but basically, if you load up the launch version of Dark Souls Prepare to Die Edition, the PC game, it has resolutions that you can choose. You can crank it up to 1080p, I think, but that's just the output resolution, which is kind of complicated and pointless on PC, because your PC is going to scale everything anyway to your monitor, but it's still internally rendering at 1024 by 720, which isn't even 720p.
Oh.
Because 720p is 1280 by 720. So this is less than 720p. And then it just is giving you options to scale. And actually, this kind of cuts in both directions. Because when I first played Dark Souls on PC, I had not just a potato rig, I had like a rotting potato rig. And I would lower the settings. I wanted to play at 360p, 480p, and it wouldn't perform any better because it's still internally rendering at 720p or almost 720p. So if you lower the settings, it still didn't perform better.
Oh,
and so my first experience with DSFix was actually heading in the other direction, which is that I had this terrible rig and I was trying to get the game to run at lower settings. So kind of a bad port all across the board. But you've got some notes. So what do you have for us?
So first off, from Gaming Nexus, there's this kind of long passage, but this was one of the more critical reviews at the time. They gave it like a 7 or something, and I think a lot of this has to do with some of the tech specs. So first off, the developer has elected to incorporate the dreaded Games for Windows Live platform with the experience. This cumbersome and often intrusive service is required to play the game, online or off. Mind you, this is in addition to the Steam service that you are likely already running. You have to either create or log into an existing Xbox Live/Games for Windows account before you can even get started. This can take some time, as recovering an existing account can take ages, and the servers are incredibly slow. It was easily 10 to 15 minutes before I was able to launch the actual game. This is in addition to installation time for the software. Once you do get into the game, it becomes very clear that this experience wasn't designed for the PC. This is a straight port of the Xbox 360 version of the game. One of the first things I always do when launching a PC game for the first time is to check the resolution that has been auto-detected for the game. I soon discovered that the default setting in use at the time was 1024 by 720. Surely I could run the game at better settings than this. Well, in theory I could, but the game doesn't offer many options beyond these. This game doesn't look anywhere near as polished and crisp as the console versions in high definition. The cutscenes especially look extremely pixelated and bland due to the low resolutions, to the point that it is appalling. PC gamers expected way more than this, and rightfully so. And then they kind of go into Durante's mod and how they were kind of quick on the draw with trying to find a solution to things.
The mod came out very quickly. We'll get into our notes later, but the mod comes out shockingly fast.
Yeah.
I think I would maybe put an asterisk next to like the game looks worse than the console versions. I don't know if that's true. From what I remember, it looks basically the same, but you are sitting closer.
Yeah.
You're a lot closer to your monitor. Any pixel that's off is not doing good. It's probably a stretch to say that it looks worse than the console version, but it is true that it runs worse than what PC gamers expect from their games. It's worth noting that a PC game, it's not hard to change the rendering resolution of a PC game. Once you have your 3D graphics ready in just about any software, changing the output resolution, if you're not changing the aspect ratio, it's pretty straightforward. You know, you look at old Windows 95 games, and some of them just let you keep scaling the game indefinitely because it's like, yeah, it's just up to the hardware that the user has. So yeah, a lot of those are quite valid concerns. But yeah, what else do you have for us?
So from Dark Zero, we have to thank a NeoGaffer by the name of Durante, who supplied a fix that allows the user to force Dark Souls to render at the resolution they require, and even allows for super sampling. This fix worked perfectly for me and was giving a constant 30 frames per second, which in the world of PC gaming might not be great to hear, but the game is locked at 30 FPS due to some hard-coded animations and other aspects that will mess up if it was unlocked to 60 frames per second. With that said, I instantly felt that the PC version was running smoother than on consoles. And then, yeah, they go into the ease of use with Durante's mod.
Yes. The thing with DSFix is that it is a beautiful mod. You download a zip file, you drop those files into the Dark Souls folder, and you're done.
Yeah.
It's an easy fix, and then there's a little text file that you open, and you just type in the resolution you want. I think you can uncap the frame rate there. It's very straightforward. There's little questions. You can just put a yes or a no or something like that. And this is a mod like my dad could install it, probably. He's not a gamer. He's not a computer guy, but you know, people who aren't into computers could use this mod very easily. It's not modifying that much of the game's code. It's certainly not modifying any content. There's no other steps other than downloading Dark Souls from Steam or whatever, dropping this mod into the folder, and you're done. I think that's how mods should work, in my opinion.
Yeah. RPGsite.net also says, even so, the technical side stands lower than its art. Luckily, there's an easy-to-use mod that's out online that will easily remedy this, but one has to wonder why the developers couldn't accomplish this.
Yes, the big question of why, which is also something Durante asks in this ROMChip article. Why did this happen? And there's not a great answer, obviously, FromSoft. They're not usually programming PC games, but as Durante gets into, it's so easy to change the frame buffer because you're just sending an image through DirectX 9. DirectX 9 as an API handles all the graphic card stuff, and it handles all these almost firmware level or hardware level questions that developers would otherwise have to answer. It's so easy to just change the resolution of the frame buffer, and this question remains, why was this port made so badly? I guess something we haven't talked that much about yet, because I was focusing mostly on resolution, but frame rate is obviously a huge part of the sort of PC gamer conversation on Dark Souls. In addition to the difficulty, I remember one of my roommates in college walking by as I was playing Dark Souls, and the first thing they said was, I think it was starting Blighttown, and the first thing they said was like, oh, the frame rate dips are real here. Like, in his mind, that's what the game was known for. It was like, you go to Blighttown and you get 10 FPS. And certainly, yeah, that's a very open level, and the frame rate gets kind of spicy there. So for some people, that's also what the game's known for, is that it's not just that it's locked at 30, but it dips below that a lot on console. And one of the things that now you can do in DSFix that wasn't there in its initial version was that you can uncap the frame rate. The problem is that, as you mentioned, like a lot of the animations get kind of messed up. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the ladders are the main concern. Climbing ladders doesn't work the same way or reliably at a higher FPS.
Just to my broad understanding, there have been some glitches with how ladders function when those things happen. If you try to go down a ladder normally, like once you reach the bottom, you might like fall through the floor or something to that capacity.
So a little background on Durante. So when he was very young, he grew up with a Commodore 64 and then a DOS computer. And just the process of his dad opening DOS games required the use of the command line or directly modifying a config file. This was a big step for him in understanding the technical aspect of games, is that, you know, in a pre-Windows era, you had to know a fair bit about your machine and what games were doing just to run games or run them optimally. Because especially sound cards in that era, if you didn't know the right settings to choose, you weren't going to have a good time, essentially. And that's sort of across the board. When computers were worse, people had to get better at using them. And so that's sort of where he comes from. And nowadays, Durante has a PhD in a very specific kind of high performance computing. So that's his research focus, getting the most performance out of really high end PC rigs, and especially parallel computing that he works in. For a guy like him to look at a game like Dark Souls, he's in the exact right position to know how to fix it, even without access to the source code, which we'll get into a bit later. We mentioned Games for Windows Live, a very much hated service. I think that was one of the first things you were telling me about the PC port was that, yeah, it's going to use this Games for Windows Live service that everyone hates. So Games for Windows Live was this Vista era attempt to bring the Xbox experience to PC. I remember hearing a lot about it when Halo 2 eventually came to Windows Vista. So you couldn't play it on Windows XP, even though you theoretically could. So they're really pushing Vista because there's a lot of bad press about Windows Vista.
Yeah.
And as well, when we're talking about launchers, so Dark Souls Prepare to Die Edition is still, it's at the tail end of this era of boxed PC games. You buy a disc at the store and then you insert the disc into your computer. A game would include its own launcher, and then if they ported that game as is to Steam, you have the Steam launcher, and then you have the Games for Windows launcher on Dark Souls on top of it. Players don't like that. Rockstar was doing that for a while. Maybe they still are, where it's like you download the Rockstar launcher even though you're already using Steam.
Right.
And I still kind of hate Steam. I'm going to say that on the record. Steam is DRM. Steam is an unnecessary launcher, and computers are faster now, so you don't feel it as much. But I remember my old HP laptop with like 4 gigs of RAM. Steam would slow down games. It was the worst. And I would A/B it. I would look at games that I got on like GOG or some sort of direct service where there was no DRM and that I'd played on Steam. Huge performance hit.
Wow.
Maybe that's not as bad now. When people complain about like, oh, the Epic Game Store, I agree. But also to normalize Steam as like, this is how PC games are played. I'm still a little bit like, just let me download the EXE. Let me run the EXE on my computer. And then, yeah, there's the quote about direct platform expectations that the port isn't broken per se. It's running exactly like it always did, but it's not matching the expectations of the new platform. Which, if you want people's money, you have to think about. Let me see if I can pull up that quote. I don't really think it was fundamentally broke, that the game was broken. In my opinion, the port was broken. So it's more of maintenance in the sense of really making it conform to the expectations you have for the particular platform, as opposed to just in general the game working as it should in the aspects that are non-technical and independent of the platform. I really, in principle, wouldn't classify what I did as repair or maintenance because the game that they released on PC was running exactly like the console version that they had released on PlayStation, basically. It was a one-to-one thing. It wasn't broken, so maybe calling it DSFix was, in that case, not the best choice of words. It is literally just the game that they already released, but now you can play it on PC.
Right.
And yeah, and then he has this quote that essentially if it was a bad game all around, he wouldn't have been interested in making the mod, but the game has to be slightly flawed to necessitate the mod. So Dark Souls was the perfect mix. This is an incredibly good game, and also this port is lacking in these ways. And that's sort of the exact mix. And I think Knights of the Old Republic 2 is a good comparison because it's not that the game was so unfinished that there was nothing fun there. It's that this game is incredible and it could have been even better.
Right.
And then here's what we can add in later. So I think that mix is really nice. An important note here, DSFix was released within 30 minutes of the game's launch on PC, which is wild. What he writes is that he did all this prep work with a similar DirectX 9 game. So I guess Durante figured out this game will probably use DirectX 9 because this is a very quick turnaround port. And so he tested on what he believes to be Witcher 2, and he got a similar project running. He's like, how can I intercept the call to the API? And so he got it running, and then he did that in the 2 weeks leading up to the Dark Souls launch, and then he just applied that to Dark Souls, and literally within half an hour, he had this mod ready, uploaded it, and I guess that's part of the lore of this mod and why it took off so quickly is that he was right there at launch, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I can't imagine doing that. The author asks him about the ethics of this. Like, do you think companies are releasing broken PC games essentially on purpose and then letting the fan community fix them? Do you think that's exploitative? His answer is interesting because he's since worked in porting. He's ported a bunch of the East games to PC, like those RPGs.
Oh, yeah.
He also ported Little King Story, which maybe that's a separate video, but his experience porting what I think is a Wii game to the PC. And he described it as like the worst code base he's ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
Like this was written for a really specific console at a specific frame rate, and for us to port it, I think he didn't necessarily port it, but they brought him on as sort of an emergency fixer after someone else had ported the game.
Oh, okay.
And so he just had to release a patch that like did the bare minimum that he could do to fix it without access to the source code. So he's worked in the industry on major releases.
Yeah.
He's basically said that the industry has no pipeline for ports. There is no way of doing things typically that is set up because if you're a AAA dev, if you're Ubisoft, you've already got your engine written for all the platforms. But in terms of a big-ish game that you're porting as sort of an afterthought, when he was talking to legal departments, they were surprised that he wanted the source code for porting a game. I guess they just thought he'd write like a little skin that wraps the game. Really basic things that a software developer would need to port a game to another console. There's just no pipeline in place to do that. And gaming's a relatively new medium. These are just new questions, I guess. So hopefully that improves. And obviously this is a mod that's going on, I think, a decade, right? It's been over 10 years since Dark Souls came out on PC, which is weird to think about. But I guess these are questions going forward, is like, how do companies like this that aren't Ubisoft, that aren't EA, but still big companies, how do they handle the ports if there's a third party porting a game? Still up in the air, interestingly. And the article was not super optimistic about it.
Oh, gosh.
So that's fun. Yeah, that's about all we have to say about DSFix, a great mod. And I think sort of the thesis rings true that this is a great game that had some technical problems on PC. And those are the two things that make the conditions for a mod like this to just blow up and become possibly one of the most popular mods of all time, which I think is really cool. At least non-content wise. That's about it. If you're still watching this late in the video, we are finally going to reveal Will's backstory with the 2 copies of Dark Souls 2, which I think you actually have more copies of Dark Souls. Don't you have 3 copies of Dark Souls 2? Do I have that right?
Yeah, so these are the vanilla Dark Souls 3 versions for PlayStation 3. And then I have the Scholar of the First Sin edition digitally on my PS4. Yeah.
Which is forgivable because that is legitimately a different game. But you got 2 copies of vanilla.
So 2 copies.
Hold on, is one of them still sealed?
Yes, sir.
Wild.
Because I'm preserving this baby.
So why do you have 2 copies of Dark Souls 2 in the box?
So, flashback time. I was a struggling university student. Not financially, mind you, at the time. Struggling academically because of my poor habits. I was diligent and I behaved myself. I think it released on a Friday. I was finishing up exams so I could comfortably come home and just like boot up the game and go right into it. At my local independent game shop at the time, I pre-ordered this Black Armor edition.
Black Armor edition.
Yeah, because I wanted the first print special copy for the PS3, but I wanted to play it on day one, naturally, because like these are the games where I pay top dollar. I'm like on it.
And also I want to point out, so Dark Souls came out when we were in high school. Dark Souls 2, this is probably the first major game you're excited about while we're in post-secondary.
Yeah.
So this is the first time that maybe our time's a bit more valuable.
Yeah.
Maybe we're paying for our education finally. So it's not like, oh, I'll skip gym class to play Dark Souls. It's like, no, this is a real degree from a real institution and you have to manage your time.
Like, I think I was calling the store too, and I think they might have been conveniently delayed with their shipments and everything of the game. So I was keeping tabs like every hour. I was like, are the games in yet? And they're like, not yet. All right, I'm going to finish my exam. And then by the time I got there, they were like, oh yeah, we don't have any copies of the Black Armor edition in yet. Just the tier above just a basic copy of the game.
Sure.
They're like, we don't have any PS3 copies of this, but we do have the collector's edition with the giant like statue and everything.
Nice.
And I was a kid with too much money and I was like, Dark Souls 2, I will buy this now. And then I had already pre-bought, paid for the whole thing.
The whole price,
I think. So the next time I came in, I got the other copy of the game for posterity. So I was like, hey, you know what? I'll hold on to this because like I love the franchise so much. It'd be nice to have another copy and keep it sealed for now and everything. So I paid an arm and a leg for the collector's edition and I still have the statue and the maps and all that stuff that it came with.
Okay, so you don't have any base version of the game. No. You only have the fancy pants.
Yeah, all the steel books.
That is incredible. Good advice for the kids at home. Buy as many copies of your favorite games as possible. I've bought so many copies of Mario 3 over the years. Who am I to say? But I never paid more than $6 for them. So your financial choices are your own, I suppose.
On that note, don't take financial advice from us.
Yes.
See you next time.
Be careful with your money. And on that note of dumb things you shouldn't buy, we have merch now on the show.
We're getting into it now.
We're getting into it.
We're keeping this rolling. Yeah.
But we're not demanding anyone buy merch. I want to be clear. If you're not in the habit of spending money, just buy a white Hanes shirt and write Computer Lab on it. I'll endorse it. That's real merch. But this shirt came to me like in a dream, like in a waking. I was awake one day and I had an idea, is I guess the word I'm looking for. But I had an idea. I thought this would be a cool shirt. Some people have asked what's the meaning of no downloading.
I was going to ask that because we keep seeing comments about it.
A few comments, and I think there's no real way to explain it unless you've lived it, which is that School Computer Lab labs are very hostile toward downloading.
Fair. Yeah.
I think when we were growing up, it was just discouraged. I heard stories from like nieces and nephews who are in school now that like there's a lot of blocks in place so that one of my nephews was doing like a PowerPoint and he tried to download a PNG to put in the PowerPoint and it was blocked as a download.
Wow.
Which to me is weird. And for the record, anytime you're browsing the web, you are technically downloading all the web pages you access. So it's a really strange line to draw in the sand. No downloading, because web browsing is inherently downloading. But sort of true to life to make this feel like a real computer lab. There's rules. There's no downloading. So I have this shirt, no downloading in the computer lab. I'm proud of it.
And I have this brand new hat, which kind of covers the same bases.
Yeah, very similar words on that hat. So if this is any advertisement, I was wearing this shirt in public and someone said, and I quote, "Cool shirt." Were they being sincere? Were they making fun of me? No one knows. And you can ask yourself that question as you purchase your computer lab shirt. But please don't buy the merch if you're not feeling it. We're not asking people to spend their hard-earned money on dumb stuff. But if you see this shirt and you're like, whoa, my life has been incomplete until today. If you're having that reaction, then yeah. This has been Computer Lab Hijinks. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Will.
Telling you to keep your files safe, keep your passwords managed, and for goodness sake, don't click on any strange links. We'll see you in a week.
Bye-bye.